in our lives, the turning of the seasons in our own personal lives and stories. Be with us this morning. Be with Terry, our speaker, as we consider the mystery of baptism and your unconditional love, which steadies us and speaks to us and reminds us who we are throughout all the seasons of our lives. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. It's really good to see all of you. It's really good for me to be again with Terry Eason. Terry is an architect by training. He is undoubtedly the premier liturgical designer, the liturgical furnishings designer in the Episcopal Church. What that means is that Terry designs things like the new cathedral chairs. He was the designer of that. I first got to know Terry through his work at Sewanee, the University of the South. Terry played a major role in the furnishings at the chapel at Virginia Seminary, where Broderick Greer went to seminary, and that was a massively important project. In Memphis, Tennessee, Terry did a big project for us at Grace St. Luke's Church and School, where we basically the entire interior was transformed. New floor, new ceiling, new antiphonal organ, new platform for the baptismal font, new, all the tracery work that was magnificent up in the ceiling, reworking the new oak floor so it changed the acoustics. It was just a wonderful and just lovely renovation of the entire interior. And Terry was there from step one through completion. I think Terry's great gift in the Episcopal Church is balancing almost perfectly sometimes tradition and flexibility. So the 1979 prayer book requires a lot of flexibility in these spaces because we've got to receive communion, for example, and how do we do that in buildings that weren't exactly built for communion, but how do we do that in a way that if we change things a bit, it looks like it's always been there, and that really is Terry's great, great gift. And I could say a lot more about that, but you'll get the impression once you hear him speak and see some of his slides. What's exciting about today is Terry's going to focus largely on one thing, but there are a couple other things he'll mention. He's going to focus largely on a new font for the cathedral. I think some of you will remember this. A lot of you are new, and you would have no way of knowing this. I think it was in the year, and Rebecca Richardson's the chair of A&A, can help me with this, and Larry's our chancellor, he'll remember as well. I think it was in the year 2015, and you had an interim dean named Pat Malloy, who was wonderful. And the old stone font, I think in the middle of the night, disintegrated. It literally imploded to such a degree that it can't be repaired. And it was through no one's fault. It literally just happened. And so here we are many, many, many years later, and we've been enjoying baptisms ever since then through some makeshift fonts that we also use that have holy water where you can cross yourself as a memory of your baptism. But there's been a dream for many years since then to do a new baptismal font. Terry was hired as the designer of that a few years ago. It's taken a lot of different iterations and conversations with a font committee and with Arts and Architecture Commission to get to this point, but Terry can share the final design with you. And we can also announce that this new font is funded, which is really exciting as well. It'll be a memorial font, and we can talk more about that later. The other thing that we can announce today that's really exciting, and Terry's had a hand in this, each Sunday in church, you hear the great bell in the East Tower, which is tolled. It's a bell that can be tolled. In the West Tower, there's a huge set of bells, sometimes called a carillon, although it's technically not quite a carillon, it's close, that has not been played in arguably 30 years. And we have funded a new pulley system through a major gift that will fund that work next year with a bell foundry called Sunderland Bell Foundry that Terry linked us with, so that hopefully by the end of next year, the bells in the West Tower will play for the first time in a long time, which will just be wonderful. And Terry's been instrumental in getting us to that point as well. So it's just a great privilege to be with him as he takes such good care of us. Terry, welcome back to the cathedral.
Good to be here. And Richard is a gracious person and gave a very gracious introduction, and so I'll try to measure up. Is the volume okay on this? Louder, how just closer, I guess. Okay. So, and speak up if I neglect to hold it in the right place. It's really good to be here, and I don't often present on a Sunday morning, but Richard thought it would be a time when the most of you would have a chance to engage some of the things that have happened and are probably in the near term going to happen in the cathedral, and he just referenced those. The maintaining a building as rich as the cathedral is in detail and history. The stones of the cathedral are, more than 100 years old. So it's really something that it always needs attending to. I mean, we all have houses, and we all know, and sometimes we give up houses and move to condos because houses are hard to maintain. But big complex buildings also need to be attended to. And they are a rich heritage, a patrimony of an institution like the cathedral, but then they're also part of Denver and part of the general cultural aspect of a city like Denver. So, and I'll call out next to advance the slides. And they will help me with that. So next, please. And there, and there's a duplicate here. So go one past the duplicate there. So you're all familiar with the cathedral, and in fact, I think some trees have been edited on this side of the cathedral. It's a very large building. I think is it the fourth largest cathedral in the Episcopal Church? I think it's the fourth or fifth. It's probably the fourth, because I think it's bigger than the one in Spokane. But Washington, New York first, Washington second, and San Francisco third, and I think Denver is fourth in size. And as you know, it was the nave only of the original design. But the thing about the nave, it has wonderful, elegant arches. If you look at the rhythm of the arches, and I don't even need to say, filled with some absolutely magnificent stained glass. I mean, your collection of stained glass, including such a large amount of work of the Conic Studios, is quite remarkable. That studio has not been in business, I think, for 30 or 40 years, but you got some of the last windows from them. And so that's a wonderful patrimony as well. But the rhythm of the nave arches, I think, is one of the most wonderful things. Next slide, please. So, and I'll go, and again, you see the rhythm of the great clerestory windows. The smaller windows in the side aisle, which have their own themes, and you've got a wonderful book, I know, that describes the windows in great detail. Get a copy and look at it and get familiar with it if you haven't already. And then, of course, most of you who've been around here for a while certainly know the cathedral was not completed, and that it stopped where the stone part of the nave stops, but at the same time they built what I think was intended to be an interim chancel in brick, and built in brick so there would be less angst in taking it down should the cathedral ever want to expand beyond that point. And then things happen like the Great Depression, and all kinds of things happen in history that impact decisions. The National Cathedral in Washington took about 100 years to build. Most cathedrals, if you look at them, took huge amounts of time. Cologne, which is huge in Germany, was just finished in the last 100 years. The Westminster Abbey is a medieval building, a true abbey building, but the front facade was done by a classicist architect in the 17th century, long after the main body of the cathedral was the abbey was built. So, but of course, there where you see the transition from stone to brick, and the brick color is really a very good match, and it doesn't scream, hey, I'm a different material, and it's beautifully detailed as well. So, and then of course the interior of it reads as a little bit of a different vocabulary, architectural vocabulary, than the nave. So next slide, please. And here you see, of course, a much more recent building that's a nice connection from your earlier, this building, and connects in a more modern way, and the ramp down to the cathedral, giving accessibility. Here you see the end of the cathedral from the nave in stone on the east side, and then you see the gable is the housing for the great pipe organ. So that is with the three square panels, and the round thing above houses the pipe organ, and that speaks directly into the side of the nave. So it's interesting to understand, of course, the form of the cathedral. So next slide, please. And then the interior, I don't have to tell you about the interior of the cathedral. And I popped in there this morning after the early service, and yes, it still looks just pretty much like this. So, and since I was here a year ago, so it's waiting for a few more things to happen. Next slide, please. So this is a drawing that shows the length of the cathedral is drawn to scale. So you see the height of the cathedral, the length, the rhythm of the lower side aisle arches, and the rhythm of the upper clerestories. And then you see a little bit of a different vocabulary in the chancel, which we did not put the stone color on, so that is the white and black part of the drawing is the chancel. You can see the raised floor and the grills that the organ speaks out of. On the side you don't see, opposite the organ grills, there are windows, beautiful windows, that are only on the right-hand side of the chancel. So, but these arch rhythms, I think, are a very strong part of the sense of St. John's. Next slide, please. And here we see those windows I just mentioned that are opposite the organ grills on the west side of the cathedral. And the pinnacle of, I believe it's the bishop's chair. There's several great chairs, but I believe this is the bishop's chair. So, and again, you see the rhythm, the arcade of the four arches. And you see a transition from the limestone, the oolitic limestone, and then to some more or less well-matching brick. So next slide, please. And right in the hallway here is a photograph with not a great reflection on it. But this drawing exists. It was one of the earliest and most expansive versions of the cathedral. It looks not only the great tower and transepts that never got built, but you see exact from the tower, big tower coming to the left, is pretty much what got built. It's very close to what got built and that you're used to seeing. The transepts here are quite large. Beyond it was a great choir, beyond the crossing, and then beyond that was something I assume was a lady chapel, or a chapel that sat beyond the end of the choir, very much in an English cathedral tradition. You'll see those in lots of English cathedrals, a lady chapel or some other chapel that's sort of beyond the high altar. Next slide, please. So this, and I'm pretty sure this was the cathedral under construction. Now, if someone knows better, please speak up, but that's my sense of it. The furniture does not look like the furniture that I'm used to seeing, but I believe this is when the nave was built. The temporary chancel, the interim chancel, was not built yet, and it looks like 2 or 3 bays of the nave were upfitted as a chancel, and the building was roofed over, and you began to worship in it. This is exactly the way it was in reverse at the National Cathedral when the choir inn was built many decades before the nave was finished in the 1970s. And there were always interim walls and things were moved around as it was built. So I think this is a very interesting photograph. But the furniture is different. I don't quite know the history of that. But to understand that things grew incrementally is very important. Next slide, please. So, and then an early view of the chancel. Obviously, the cathedral had been built full height, the nave more or less finished, upfitted with the pews that were there until just a few years ago. And notice that the lectern and pulpit, the current furniture is there, the great screen is there, the wrought iron screen with the gold leaf elements in it. But notice the acoustical canopies that were over the pulpit and the lectern, which were very fashionable. Well, I guess they were technically up, the latest technology to help project the sound of someone reading or preaching out into the nave. They weren't very pretty, and many churches had them, and they've all disappeared. I don't know of any of them existing in any church. And next slide, please. So, and then we have the current cathedral with the chairs in place. So now I'm going to just back up and give a little bit of recent history, if you'll go to the next slide as well. We're going to talk about the nave and the development of chairs. I was originally called to come and work with the Art and Architecture Commission on the font, but the huge work of putting in the air conditioning, taking up the floors, and all of that work, which then led to the decision to not put the pews back on the new floor and to consider chairs. And the committee had already done a lot of work on the chairs, the type of chair, and looking at things before I even came and got involved. Next slide, please. So here is the interior, and many of you may remember it. This is from the balcony. So you're sort of outside the construction zone, looking at all the work on the floors that was below the plastic. And the plastic was to keep the dust and dirt from getting, I'm sure it did, but it was to keep most of the dust and dirt of the construction area down below. So next slide, please. This is from the chancel, which was not in the construction area, looking out over that. And next slide, please. This is under the plastic, and where the floors it all had been dug out to make space for the ductwork for the air conditioning, and then to re-support the floor with new floor framing. And here you see the floor framing that was put in to support the current wood floors that you see. And have the outlets for the air conditioning, but it was mainly to get room for the ducts. And room to get down in the crawl space and maneuver. Next slide. And then I think the second time I came, the previous slides were the first time I came. This was the second time I came, and the floor had been finished, and the cathedral had decided to purchase a large number of chairs as flexible chairs, and you're sitting in them. But they provided interim seating in the cathedral until the new chairs arrived. And then next slide, please. Again, you see the floor, the new floor finish. The old terracotta tiles were retained. And in fact, where some interim tiles had been put in place, they were removed. And so I think the committee had decided to just, where there were these original tiles, to keep them, and then every place else became wood. Next slide, please. And then here, the samples of chairs that were being looked at, you see in the front row. So the committee really spent a lot of time on this. I mean, it was, I sort of came in at some point and started advising about a specific chair that I think the samples on the right are early samples of the original chair. And I think the chair on the left was from Sewanee, if I'm not mistaken. So that was brought here from Tennessee just to look at. Next slide, please. So, and then we did a drawing. One of the things that was the goal was to have a chair that looked traditional by having the ladder back look, which is so familiar in church chairs. And you know, so many churches in England, cathedrals tend to have chairs, almost all have chairs. Churches in France have chairs frequently if they're very large, or the cathedrals almost always have chairs. But they don't stack, and they don't do a number of things we would like a chair to do. So these chairs, they're a little bigger than traditional church chairs, but they look traditional. They have a place for a book, and they gang. And this was showing when the committee was considering a fold-down kneeler. The problem with the fold-down kneeler is the most you can get it folding out is if you have a big tummy, you would have to cling on to sort of kneel because it doesn't. So the committee said, well, let's just have the kneeler slide out and you can position it where you want to. So the kneeler is really loose and separate from the chairs, and you can slide it in and out. So next slide, please. So, and those are a close-up of the samples. And next slide. And then the chairs in the cathedral, and then the interim chairs, and then the next slide will have the chairs that you're familiar with. So that's, I think, sort of a short history of the chairs. You've lived with them for more than a year, I think. It's been a while, and I'm getting good feedback from various people I've talked to. So I think we should proceed and get to some of the other things they've asked me to talk about. So next, please. And again, the photographs of the chairs finished and in place. So next. And again, next. So now about the font, which is the original reason that they had me come to Denver. Next, please. This is the font that was built after the original font fell apart. I've never heard of that happening before. I was trying to speculate why it might have happened. Probably the joints that held the various elements together gave way, and then the weight of the font caused it to collapse under its own weight. That's my guess as to what happened. And you can see there was the base of the font was left there for a while that held that font. These are designed and used as, and I didn't know until today there were 3 of them, but is used as a font to welcome you at the entrance. And then there are 2 more that are used really as what we would call holy water stoops, where people can choose to dip their hands in water upon entering, sometimes exiting the cathedral, to recall your baptism and entrance into the church. Next. So we did a study and looked at lots of locations. We looked at even putting one all the way at the back of the nave, so just as you came through the narthex, and you have the stoop there now, but that was one location. Putting it in the 3rd bay from the back sort of became the idea that was most pursued. Today you have a cross aisle in the 4th bay, and of course you have chairs, so you can make a cross aisle wherever you want it, and you can put the font, a movable font, wherever it seems to work the best. But this was the idea that was talked about the most, and the font would sit in the aisle. You might remove a few chairs around it to give a little more space. It may or may not have the cross aisle at that location, but having it in the nave so that you get to it fairly soon upon entering and can recall your baptism, but it's in the midst of the congregation. And so it has a little bit closer proximity, front and back, by being in the midst of the congregation, and it's symbolic because the person being baptized is being baptized into the body of Christ, which is the congregation. So represented by the congregation. So that's one of the drawings we did that looked at ideas. Next slide, please. This is another location that's talked about because I think with the movable fonts, you've developed some different traditions. Of course, the original font was over sort of to the left of the lectern on the right-hand side, the organ console side, down on the nave floor. Not the most prominent location. So, but to have it be very prominent, so this is a possibility, and then the next slide would put it, you've used it in the chancel enough that there's now some expectation that you would like to be able to still do that. And so we originally were talking about a stone font, even perhaps a font, a very large font, larger than this, one that would be plumbed with water and had flowing water. And because the structure of the tiles, the historic tiles, were not they were not goosed up structurally, there's going to be a problem with the weight of a large stone font, plus the fact that it was not going to be movable. And I think the fact that it couldn't be movable became the biggest tripping point in the committee deciding that the font should be movable. And I said, well, it can't be stone, it needs to be wood. And yet to have a dignified basin to hold the water, and so the current thought is that it would be mosaic, a mosaic bowl. And because the way it was built, it can be moved. We believe 2 strong people can position it in 3 different, the bottom base, the mid part, and the bowl in 3 parts, and position it in the chancel. In every other case, it's on wheels that are tucked underneath that don't show, and it can be rolled around very easily and then locked, the wheels locked and set in position. So that is the current proposal. Next slide, please. We'll look at, this is again a close-up of that first location I described. Next will be the second location, and third will be in the chancel. So yes. So that is what's currently being proposed. So next we'll show the overall, and then next again to see it in here, that view. And so here you see the chairs, and here you see the font in its place in the middle of the nave. It's bigger than the present metal fonts, but not so big that it can't have room to position it in the places that we've shown you. But it's a big cathedral, and most all fonts that have been designed recently are very generous. The 3 principal things in any church are word and 2 sacraments. That is the pulpit, the altar, and the font. 2 sacraments and the word. Those are the 3 primary liturgical focal points. And so we felt that the font needed to have more substance. Next slide. And here you can see it close up and a little closer, and you can see the rhythm of the arches beyond it. And next slide, more of a close-up. So we took this idea of the rhythm of simple arches with a little bit of tracery and put it on the running around the sides of the font. This would be done in carved wood tracery. Most likely a fine oak is the most likely the material that would be used. And then you see columns. And if you look around the building, especially on the front facade, you can see a lot of the stone ornament have colonnettes engaged as part of the ribbing and the trim and tracery. And so there are 8 columns that run around. This is an octagonal font, 8 equal sides. And then the upper part of the font where the basin is mounted has the rhythm of the arches running around. So next slide, please. So I think I have a drawing a little closer, but in the next slide. Yes. So here you see it up close. It has a base that gives some visual weight to it, and then the columns give it a sense of not being too chunky, but the detailing is very much like traditional Gothic detailing. And in most cases, it's assumed the font will be in the nave, unless the choice is to position it in the chancel when there is a baptism at a principal service. But in all other times that the font would be in the nave, and we hope it would have a good visual presence. We did back and forth, but the current thought is that it would not be on a step or base. And part of it is if you put it on a step, people are not as likely to get near it or pass by it. It means that you have to clear out more space for the step. And so the thought is that there would be a smaller step that was brought out that the presider at baptism and the candidate at baptism could stand on when when there is a baptism. You can see the scale of the font by comparing it to one of your chairs there on the right. So next slide. You can see the step there on the left. So next slide. And then here without that step that's added. Could you back up just so you see the step pop in place? And then go forward, and then that step goes away. So normally it's seen without that step. People can get close to the font and pass right up to it and dip their hands in water. That would be in the font. Next slide, please. And here it's shown positioned in the chancel. And next slide. A close-up, and you see all the steps that come up into the chancel. This is thought to give visibility, but that people would pass by the font if you were going to communion at the communion rail at the high altar. And the thought is that you would probably use the high altar when you had baptism. That's not essential, but it's thought that's probably what would happen. So I think you'll grow into the usage of the font, and you'll develop a tradition as to how you use it. Next slide. And then this is a close of a working drawing showing how the font would be made. And you can see the dotted line of the basin. And there is a drain for draining the water out that would be discreetly tucked into one side. The outlet for it would be tucked into one side. You can see how the wheels fit in the base. And they lock down so the font would not move once it was in position. Next slide. And that's a plan of the base where you see all the colonnettes, and then looking down on the top with the round basin and the octagonal font. Next slide. And again, the finished font in position. We could take a second. We don't have vast time, but just questions about the font. If yes.
And Reich, let me come to you real quick. Hey, Reich,
Richard's coming.
If you don't mind.
Oh, this looks like it's very large, and I'm concerned about my memory of the reason that this is here is to be that the baby is kind of held over the water, and this looks like that's going to be Up above
It's
my
about
head.
the same height. It's maybe 2 inches higher than the present glass bowl font. And the basin comes a little closer to the edge than the glass bowl comes to the edge of the present font. So I think you could get a baby over the font. This is sort of the traditional font height for holding a baby over or having an adult or youth hold their head over the font. And it actually, you should be able to get over the font easier than the present one. So any other questions? I mean, I don't want to take too long for questions here, but just since
Yes.
we're going to move past the font, and we can get a font question later too, but just while we have the font on the screen.
So will there be a cover that's over the?
No, it's the idea of covering a font has fallen totally out of preference. And so the font is normally left open, and with water standing in it. So that is the tradition. And if water is not in it, the mosaic would be an interesting visual sense of water and baptism by just the way the mosaics are done.
One or two more questions before Terry
About
pick-
the font, because we want to cover the bells.
Anyone else? If you'll just raise your hand.
Okay.
Okay, yes.
Two questions, and I'm relatively new here, but so moving it into the front, yeah, thank you.
Right.
Is there a ramp?
No, it could be lifted in
It would
three
have to be
parts.
lifted.
The base is one part.
Okay,
The main body of the font is the second part, and the basin would be taken out first. And I've checked the weight of that. That's 2 people can carry that, and 2 people can carry each of the 3 pieces and reposition it.
so what is the weight of the font?
Well, I don't have the exact number, but I know it was not something that 2 people could not carry.
Okay, and the
So-
other question is about maintenance. If it's wood, does it need, and especially in our Colorado dry environment, does it need any special care, or what is, over the long term, what is maintenance of
Well, like
maintaining
any
the
piece of
integrity
wooden
this-
furniture,
Okay.
but of course the mosaic basin is where the water is. And so presumably the water, if the water did splash out, sometimes babies are immersed in a basin. That has come back in the Episcopal Church. It's normal in the Orthodox Church, and actually pretty normal in the Roman Catholic Church these days. And I might add Lutherans and a few others as well. So it's using more water has come back strongly, and that's one of the reasons the font is proposed to be the size it is, so that it makes a bigger sense of water. And yes.
Could you describe the basin, please?
Well, we haven't developed the design of a mosaic bowl, but a mosaic is, little tiles, little marble tiles, and it would be a design, and our thought is it would probably be in blues and greens and golds, mostly blues, and have a sense of water is one of the traditional things. Right now we're doing a font that has sort of a Holy Spirit flame motif combined with water. That's the flame motif is down at the bottom of the basin, and then the water around. But anyway, that would be a piece of artwork that needs to be developed to develop the design of the basin. So, and that's not done yet. So I think we should proceed just so we can get to the other topic that we need to cover. So, and we can, if we have time at the end, we can get more questions. So next, the bell restoration is something that is been talked about quite a while. Richard just talked about it, and I believe that's been funded as well. So these 2 projects, the font and bells, have been funded, which is a wonderful thing, because I know you've got lots of things that need to be looked at in the future about the building besides these 2 projects. So next slide, please. And again, it was mentioned earlier, the great bell is in the left tower, the east tower, and then the remaining set of bells is in the right tower. And down sort of off the balcony was the chime stand, which is with levers how you pull the bells. And some of you may have seen that, and that hasn't worked in a few decades. Next slide, please. Again, that's the tower that holds the large number of bells. And the bells were done, it's not a carillon, it's called a chime. A chime is a musical bell instrument that has between 8 and 22 bells. So it's just short of 2 octaves with accidentals. Most of the accidentals in 12 notes per octave, and it's just short of 2 octaves. If you have a 2-octave instrument of 23 bells with a couple of missing accidentals, then that qualifies as a carillon, especially if you can play it with a carillon clavier, which is like a big expanded piano keyboard if the keys look more like broom handles. So, they're big wands that you beat with your fist to play it. Because you're literally, in these instruments, playing it, you're literally pulling the trackers, the mechanisms, up to the clapper, which hits the bell. So, next slide, please. I was just in the last 2 or 3 weeks investigating the bells, and I did not know who made them. And then I sort of knew who made them by doing a little digging. It's the Pettit is the most historic name, and they formed a company 1690, very early, and Brothers Edelbrock is what the Gebruder is the abbreviated GEBR. And this firm is still in existence. I think it business reorganization in Germany in the last 4 or 5 years, but it's still in existence. This instrument is unique. It's the largest set of bells they brought to the United States. It's the only chime, meaning playing, it's a 15-bell chime, the only one in America, north or south. They have a few single bells in America, but this is the only chime instrument, and it's one of the only chime instruments they ever built, because this company is known mainly for building big single bells. And the Central European bell tradition typically has a peal of a small number of large bells that ring in full swing, and that's what this company is known for. And so Americans got into tunes and carillons and chimes and playing melodies, and so American churches and universities have more of a chime and carillon tradition, and this company's tradition was more great pealing bells. So next slide. This is what a great bell looks like hung with a clapper, and you can see a wheel. So I believe this is not your East Tower, but it's a tower. It's something like this with a great bell, and the rope pulls the wheel and the whole bell swings. That makes it throw the sound out more dramatically. When the bell is swung, the clapper hits harder, and the way the sound comes out and the sound emanates from the bell up, sideways, down, and back up the other side is part of the acoustical effect of a bell on a wheel pealing. That's much more complicated. And if they swing like that, it's putting a lot of lateral load on the structure, so it has to be very strong. And your bell, I might add, is classified, your bell in the East Tower is classified as a great bell. And if the information I have from the bell website is, there is such a thing, is it's about 5.5 tons, the one bell. Think of like 3 cars or something like that. It's 2 or 3 cars. It's a very large bell, plays a low A flat, I think, or A sharp, I think. It's considered a very deep bass bell, and bells only come a few notes lower than that. And most churches don't have bells that big. So that's a great bell. And next slide. will show the current owner of the company standing next to a great bell. You can see how big they can get. I don't know how that bell compares to your great bell. I don't have the dimensions of that bell or what note it plays, but it's a recent photograph of the family. It's no longer Edelbrock. It's their successors that now have a different family name because it went through a matriarchal line. But it's a wonderful bit of history and a unique thing about your set of bells. Next slide. So here, I mean, these are molds that it's a very complicated process of pouring bronze into molds, an inner mold and an outer mold. I believe these are the inner molds. And it's pouring huge, hot, liquid bronze, and then it has to cure. If they don't cure just right, it has to be broken up and redone. It's quite a big deal and quite an art form. And there are only, I think, 6 or 7 companies. There's about 4 or 5 in Europe. There used to be a few in America, mostly in Baltimore and Ohio and upstate New York. Most of those have gone out of business. And in recent years, casting bells has come back, and Ben Sunderland, that's going to be reworking your bells, has one of the new young bell founders that has strongly reestablished the ability to cast bells in the United States and not have to import them. So, and he's not casting any bells for you, but he's restoring your chime mechanism. So next slide. So this is like a set of bells finished, being delivered on a truck. And this might have been back in the era when your bells were made. I'm not sure when this photograph was made, but it was from the Pettit and Edelbrock website. Next slide. This is your chime stand. So this is the playing mechanism that's going to be restored. Now, I think your restoration is going to include putting electric clappers. I think I read the contract correctly. So the bells can be played more easily from a traditional keyboard and electrically, but at the same time, you're restoring the traditional chime stand. And I think from bell enthusiasts, that's a great check mark that you're going to keep the chime stand. But you realize there's the levers that pull 15 bells. Someone wrote the notes on it from like a B flat, C, D, and they're numbered 1, 2. So the lowest bell is the upper left, and you come across, but notice what happens when you get to 8. Then 9 jumps down before, and then it goes back. The smallest bell, number 15, is below that biggest bell. That's not like a normal keyboard. So, but this was assuming someone wouldn't have to play a piano, but someone could follow notes and numbers to play a tune. That you could go through a hymn and say, this is note 3 and note 7, and you could learn how to do it just following numbers. And that's how Americans played bells in 1910, 1915, 1920. Carillons played more like a piano with these big batons. Really didn't start coming into popularity until the 20s. And they really took off in the 20s, 30s, and into the 60s, 70s, and now carillons are very popular instruments, and also at universities. But this chime stand is very historic for its period, and it's going to be restored, and I think that's very exciting. Next slide. And so this is looking up at a set of bells. These are not your bells. I didn't go up there. Getting up there was pretty treacherous. These photographs, the photographs I have of your chime stand, I think it was probably done 2.5 years ago. It was done when all the plastic was up under construction. But this is looking up into a set of bells, and you can see the wires, the trackers that go over and pull the clappers to make the bell ring from either a chime stand set of levers or a carillon with sharps and flats like a piano. Again, the definition of a chime is 8 to 22 bells, a carillon 23 or more. So you have a chime, but a very big chime. It's very large scale chime, meaning the bells are big and the notes a little lower. So very expensive, I might add. Lots of metal. So next slide. This is one single bell, a close-up looking at it, that's designed for swinging. And next slide. And I think that's my last slide. So any questions about bells? I know we're fairly tight on time. Richard might want to have a couple of summary comments.
No, that was outstanding. We do need to watch the clock a little bit. A quick question or two on bells. Yes, John. Wait, hold on, if you don't mind.
One comment I would make, because I've been here 50 years and I was in arts and architecture chairman and so forth, but I think it's wonderful how diligent and careful the Arts and Architecture Committee has looked at this.
Absolutely.
And I can be really, really proud that we have such unique and wonderful instrument to maintain. So
absolutely.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And it'll be great to be able to hear it again. Just to mention it, I mean, your Art and Architecture Commission goes back to the 1930s. I've worked with probably 100 churches in my career. I don't know anyone that has a committee that goes back to 1930 that deals with art and architecture. And in most cases, these fine artistic parts of churches and cathedrals are not attended to with great diligence. And I think your committee has done that on so many different things, and now we'll be tending to all the work that needs to happen on the stained glass windows, your very fine, superb stained glass windows. And then there's other work. I know there's work that needs to be done to attend to the columbarium. And these are not, work that's currently contracted or being done or currently funded, but that's future work. And I know there will be other things that come up as well. And there are these other buildings, not even just the cathedral space, but these other buildings. But it's great work that commission does.
There are several members of Arts and Architecture here. Would you please stand? So, William and Ann and Ginger and Gordon. Anyway, it's a wonderful commission. So thank them when you see them.
Good. Richard, any closing comments?
Yes, just a couple things. One, thanks everybody for all of you for being here. We do have time for a few more questions. What we're going to do is thank everyone joining us via live stream, and thanks Enrique for handling all of that. Enrique today is, without Evans Owsley here, is also going to live stream the service, so Enrique needs to get that way. So again, thanks for joining us, and if you're on the live stream, please do join us for the service that begins at 10:30 a.m. at sjcathedral.org. We can remain in here, however, with the microphone. We've got about 5 minutes.